Alright everybody, so in just a few minutes with Smart Materials in Substance Painter, you can make your sword look something like this. And this is completely passable. However, it is not portfolio quality work because everything here is procedural. I haven't put a single brush stroke on this at all. For an in-depth tutorial on Substance Painter, if you're serious about this, I highly suggest going to Substance's YouTube channel and watching Substance Painter 2018 Course Introduction. This is a multi-part series. I think they have 14 in total, where you'll see one of their artists build all their textures completely from scratch. And they create a really cool looking lantern. And even some really good renders at the end of it too. So I very much recommend you work through this. You don't even have to work through it. The project files are available for free if you want to work through it. If you just want to sit there and watch, I learned a lot myself. Honestly, I learned most of Substance Painter from the tutorial. Also, for color IDs and bake groups, I also made this video. It's on my channel. I suggest you watch that as well. It goes a little bit more in depth of the ideas behind bake groups, how and why they exactly work. This sword video was just kind of like a step-by-step, do what I do and you can make a thing kind of ordeal. Yeah, so let's get into the video. Alright, welcome to our final tutorial video in this series. When you open Substance Painter, you should be greeted to something that looks like this. You should have your materials down here, some windows, but when you open it up, you want to go to File, New, Select. You see File right here, and all the way over here is a button for Select. You want to grab your sword underscore low. This is the one we'll be texturing. And then all these other settings should be fine for you right now. 2K, DirectX, we want to compute tangent space because it's going to go into Unreal. Hit OK. And then here is your 3D viewport. The controls are the same as Maya, so hold down Alt, left click, we'll tumble around, Alt, right click, we'll dolly in and out, and then you can scroll your middle mouse button back and forth for the same thing. You can hold down Alt and then push down your middle mouse button and pan around. Over here, same controls except you can't tumble, you can spin. This is your 2D viewport. If you notice, these are our UVs, so we're painting in UV space in 2D. And right here you'll notice there's a bar. You can click and drag this to the left or right if you want more space. Typically I like to work in 3D. Now you can change that right here. There's a button where it's 2D 3D, 3D only, or 2D only. Normally I just keep it 3D 2D, and then when I want either one I'll just drag this bar out. So over here you should see your texture settings or texture set settings and layers. This might be reversed for you. I forget what it is by default, but everything should be over here. If it's not, you can go to Windows, Views, and then here's your texture set list, texture settings, shelf, all these things here. So we're going to go into texture set settings. 2K is what we'll be working in right now. And then we want to hit Bake Mesh Maps. There's a button right here. And this is your baker. This is where you'll bake your normal, world space, ID, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness map. So again, we're working in 2K. Dilation width is fine right now. Dilation is, if we were to, let's close this real quick. Pull that back out. When we bake, like our color will be in this space. It'll be just in the UV shells. Dilation, what it'll do is it'll take the very last pixel at the edge of each shell and pull that same color data all the way out in infinity, or all the way to infinity, which at this point is just actually the end of our texture set at 2K. And that helps if whatever engine is kind of misreading the UVs, or if you're scaling it up or down, it's going to help keep the same data on the edge. Because if if the engine is going to read here versus maybe just out here, if that same data is there, it's going to help with that when you're scaling your textures down like 512 or something. So let's go back to Bake Mesh Maps, bring that back open. Right here we want to use a high definition mesh, so click this little page button right here, and then click your sword underscore high. And then we want to use a cage, so hit that checkbox. Same thing, hit the page for this, find your cage, open that. We don't need to worry about distances because we're using a cage. It will cast rays based on the cage versus just using this data here, so we're all good there. Bounding box is fine, average normals, yes, ignore backface, yes. Right here with match, we want to do, instead of always, by mesh name. This is why we did the underscore high, underscore low, underscore cage. because the part before that suffix, it's going to match by that. So anti-aliasing, let's do 4K. It'll take a little bit longer to bake at 4K, but I'll just speed it up for the video so you don't have to watch it actually bake on my screen. The suffix, remember high and low, this is exactly what we want. So we'll go to world space, there's no parameters for that. ID, remember when where's Maya? So here's the low, hide that real quick, bring back the high. Remember when we put these colors on? It's going to pull these colors from the high poly and use them as data to bake a map or to bake a color ID map, and from that we'll make masks. That's going to help us a lot when we're texturing. It'll be super quick to pick out materials. So instead of color source with vertex color, if you were kicking out a high poly from say ZBrush, you'd want vertex color, but we're doing Maya with materials, so we want material color. Ambient occlusion, default is fine, except for ignore backface. Let's turn that off. That way we'll get full occlusion shadows where things intersect, and that's going to be a little bit more realistic than having a little bit of a white ghost line around it. Curvature, default. There's a lot you can get into curvature matte baking, but this is fine for now. Position, that's fine. Thickness, we're going to turn thickness off. We don't need it, and it takes a little bit of time to bake, so if you want to do your bakes quicker, you can just turn that off, because there's nothing really about thickness that we need to worry about here. We're not using skin, or we're not doing anything organic. So I will bake, and then I'll speed it up and you'll see what it's done, or what it looks like when it's done on my screen. And our bakes are done. Well, mine is done. I don't know about yours, but let's start from the rear to the front, checking our bake results. This is very important. You always want to do this because you want to find errors right now before you start texturing, and then you have to go back and change stuff. So, starting with the hilt, this looks pretty good. Let's go back into Maya and check this out. So, remember how this was super gradient and gross here? But because we baked, we took the high poly data and put it into the low poly. That looks just fine. The seam turned out pretty well. If you don't like, so if you see how this is polygonal, like there's a corner here, that's because this is a very low poly object, and we baked all of our detail down into it. But if you want this to be more cylindrical, it'll increase your poly count. But if you want it to have more detail, you can just make more topology and make it more cylindrical. If you want to see wireframe, you can go to your display settings. I have mine off to the side, but if you want this window, just go to Window, Viewport, Display Settings, and check that on. Mine's already on. It'll be all the way at the top, so just scroll down to the bottom, and then click Show Mesh Wireframe at the bottom under Mesh Wireframe. Then you can change the colors here and the opacity. I'm going to keep that off for now while we're checking our bakes. So keep going forward. This is that full occlusion that I was talking about, so that we can get like an actual hard shadow here. Once we start putting materials down, it's not going to be so apparent. But if we didn't do this, this would be perfectly white. There'd be no AO there at all, which is not what we want. Well, you might want that, depending on your object, but it's not accurate, so this is a little bit more accurate. Now this is kind of a problem, but it's kind of something you can't get away from when working with low poly stuff. So if we go back into Maya, and go back to the cross guard, and then turn our high poly back on, you'll notice this goes beyond the high poly. So it's really baking something. Let's turn on wireframe. It's baking where there isn't any information. So if we wanted to fix that, we could go into edge mode and kind of pull it down. But then we're also changing the overall shape of it. What if we wanted that edge point to be that far out? It's also cutting into the rest of it. So this is a trade-off you have to make. I'm just going to leave that there for our purposes. But other than that, you can see a little bit of the seam from where we baked. I'll zoom in super close. So see the seam here? That's where we split our edge loops, or that's where we split our UV shells. And there's really no way around a seam. This is just going to happen when you're doing super low poly stuff. If we had more topology, and if we were baking at 4K and displaying at 4K, this would actually kind of go away. Like you can see the actual pixelation in the shading. Right about there. You can see how it gets a little bit chunky. These are actual pixels in the bake. So if we were baking at higher res, that wouldn't show up so badly. Feel free to bake a higher res if you want. I just know some of your hardware isn't the best at home. So if we work at 2K, it'll be a little bit better. and turn back on wireframe. Remember how we made that flat from this angle with wireframe turned off? Doesn't look flat, does it? So that's the magic of normal maps. That looks pretty good, but when we go down to the end, we'll see this. Now I've said a few things about the sword tip and how it's going to look ugly in some cases, and I said it's actually okay. I'll show you why this is happening. If we go straight on, see how this piece up here is actually just a plane. It's just two-dimensional. There's no thickness to it. However, if we go into Maya and turn off our high poly, there is thickness to it in Maya. And this is because every 3D viewer, every 3D renderer is going to render on its own, algorithm that its programmers made. Maya is going to take this quad and it's going to give it shape how it does so. And then in Substance Painter, it's going to take a quad and give it shape to how it thinks. So because these quads aren't planar, meaning they aren't perfectly flat, here, let me just focus on this so we stop flying around. Every quad is technically two tries. So a quad can be split into two tries two different ways. In Maya, it's splitting this way. So if we go to vertex mode, vertex, select those, and then go to connect components, in Maya, it's being split this way. However, in Substance Painter, it's being split this way. Well, let's actually do the thing. Why isn't it connecting? Okay, we'll just force it with multi-cut. Or we won't. We'll just take this edge. I'm going to figure out why that's not working. Let's take that edge and flip spin. Cool. So see, when we spin it that way, it does exactly what's happening in Substance Painter. It's flat. We don't want that. That's not going to help us at all. So we'll undo that. And we'll delete that edge. Okay. So what I was doing was actually happening on the other side and not this side. So that's kind of weird. So to fix this, so basically what's happening here is because there's no thickness to this, it's not actually baking anything. It's just zero data. It's gross. So in Maya, we're going to fix that by doing just what I did here on all parts. So with multi-cut or connect component's a little bit quicker, but multi-cut is fine as well. You can actually do it quicker that way. And if you'll notice, these are soft edges because they're dots, remember? But over here, I'd use connect component, and this made a hard edge, so we're going to take this edge, shift radial menu, right click, soften edge. And now that's all soft. However, because we changed vertices, now we have to make a new cage. Every time you change, like you can move vertices a little bit, and I don't think you have to put it in a new cage, but if you change the vertex order by changing the state of vertices, like if they have an edge going somewhere, if it's a hard or a soft edge, blah, 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 you're going to have to make a new cage. Because if the vertex order doesn't match up with your cage, it's not going to bake. So this is super easy. We've already done this. First of all, delete history. Cage, we don't need this one anymore, so we can just, actually it might be nice to just copy that real quick. Just the name. And then we'll hit delete. And then we'll grab the parent, Control D. We'll hide sword low. And then with this one, I figured it out. We want to open up the parent and select all the meshes beneath it so that they're all highlighted. Then right click radial, vertex. Oh, come on, I did it earlier. Out into nothingness. Make sure you're not hovering over the mesh itself, vertex. And then it'll get them all. Then marquee select left. Grab all those, and then remember in our tool settings, double click on really just anything, do scale, object, normal, get that out of our way, and then find the end pulley thing, and then just pull it out some. I'm pretty sure that'll encompass the high, but just to be sure, we'll highlight the sword parent or the sword high parent, hit H. You shouldn't see anything. Maybe at the very end. That's just a clipping plane. The further away you get, the easier it is gonna, or the more the renderer will see through it. But when we're close, we know we're right. And even the end. Okay, cool. So we'll hide the high. and we will export our low. So, well, wait, let's rename this first. I'm just going to paste in sword cage because we already did that. And then I'm going to copy this part, open it up. Don't forget to save. Double click that, paste, double click that, paste, and the last one. Wait, screwed that one up. Okay, so highlight the parent, export again, file, export selection, cage, yep. And then we'll hide the cage, select the low parent, and can we just hit G? Yeah, okay, cool. So G will repeat last, and if your last thing was an export, you can repeat the export. Sword low. Okay, cool. So now, here's the tricky bit. Sometimes Substance Painter will let you do this, sometimes it won't. Let's move display settings out of the way. We need to go to Edit, Project Configuration, and then we can actually select a new mesh for our mesh that we're going to paint on. Now, we already have Sword Low FBX, and we're going to go Select, and it's going to select Sword Low FBX. However, sometimes this is just a pointer, so it might actually still point to memory, or what the old sword was in memory versus what we just overwrote. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know like what little thing to do to change it, but sometimes it works. We'll see. Hit OK. And then we'll drag this back out. Bring back your display settings, turn on show mesh wireframe to make sure, and there are our changes. Cool. It worked. So now we'll go back to Bake Mesh Maps, and because I said it's doing pointers, this is already here under cage file. We can just hit bake, and this should work. So I'll see you after the bake. And bakes are done, and it's fixed. Wonderful. Okay, so let's make sure that didn't break anything else. So the tip is good. All that's fine still. And the end is good. Okay, cool. So now we can start texturing. So we're in texture set settings. We want to go to layers. And yeah, down here. So we've got the stuff you'll bring in for a project. This is all our bakes right here. Or I guess I'll show you where the bakes go to. When we bake, it's going to be in mesh maps, and here's your normal world space, blah, blah, blah. So in your 3D viewer, there's a material. So that's super small. Let's make this bigger so you can see. Here, in this little drop down, we can see the base color, which we don't have a base color yet, so it'll be that. Height. You know what? Let's do this for you. Let's just drop a smart material on there first. Let that load. It takes a couple seconds. And I'm going to do something a little complex, like copper worn. Why not? So you can just select any of these smart materials and drag it underneath layers. Give it a second to calculate. Go back to material, and there's a copper sword. So with this selected, or with this little drop down, you can go to base color. You can see your base color inputs. You can go to your height. There's no height data on it yet, so it'll be black. Roughness, metallic. It's all metal, so it should be white. Non-metal will be black. Oh, by the way, with roughness, some people get confused about this. Roughness, think of roughness as there is a roughness value and it is white. It is 1. Roughness is 1. So if you remember in Photoshop, black conceals, white reveals. So where the lighter it is, the more rough it is. Where the darker it is, the more shiny it is. So the darker parts are going to be shiny, the whiter parts are going to be rough. It's the exact opposite of specular. We were on normal, so there's our normal map, which there isn't much data, oddly enough. I think that might be because we're looking at the normal basis of this because it's overwriting. No, wait, that's exactly what it was. That's the material normal. If we go down to our bakes, this is our bake. Keep going down. ID. If you remember, these are the colors we baked in from the ID map. Curvature bake, ambient occlusion. There's the darkness. There's C in the AO bake. It's super dark, but when we go back into material, a quick way to go back into material is just hit M, and we'll jump back to that. See, it's pretty much gone, which is just fine. Anything else really big when you talk about there? Position, not really. This is all automated stuff. Once you start using Smart Materials, it's going to read this and do stuff for you. You don't really need to look at the bakes beyond what we did in the very beginning. So you can go back up to lighting material, go back to our copper sword. I'm not really sure how I want to texture this, to be honest. Let's do, well, I like this. This is an okay start. So let's make this copper only be on the blade itself. That'll be pretty easy. There's a couple ways to do this the way that we've actually baked here. But a quick way is with our copper worn folder, which you can click the folder and here's a dirt layer, worn surface, base material. You can turn these on and off with these little open circles. If you don't want the dirt, you can turn off the dirt. If you don't want the worn, you can make it shiny. I think the dirt is the roughness. Yeah. So if you see that little bit of roughness value there, you can turn the dirt on and off. I'm just going to leave this as is for now. At the folder right here, we want to right click on this little square here. We want to add a black mask. So that, just like in Photoshop, just hid everything. So we're back to square one. If we want to see it again, we would just, remove mask. But we're going to Control Z, bring that back. See how you can select this square here? Left click and select the mask itself, and then right click on the mask. And then we want to add color selection down at the bottom. And then with color selection selected, not the mask itself, but with this little new thing down here, you'll see in properties we have a color selection. And then at the bottom we have colors. And then pick color. You're going to pick a color, and if you remember this is our ID mask that we baked. We can just click this blue, and then automatically it's created a mask based on those colors. So everything that was blue, or rather the blade, is now copper. Or, if we didn't want to do it that way and we wanted it to be super easy, let's just Control D, duplicate this. We'll hide the old one. We will delete this color selection right here. Just hit the X on the end of it. And that will that'll bring our mask back to black. We can right click on that and do Add Paint. And then with this paint selected, we can go all the way over here. Here's the brush that we're using. You'll see brush. And then we can go 1, 2, 3 down, and this is select by polygon. Actually, I'm going to turn off wireframe in the display settings. So here, turn that off. You'll still see wireframe there because we have this on. So in brush mode, this is what it looks like. And then when you click select by polygon, it'll turn that on. Up here, we can, is it select by contiguous mesh? I wish it had a little, yep. Okay, so polygon fill. And here's our black and white selector. So remember, black conceals, white reveals. So if we click on any polygon, we'll start getting our copper back. We can also marquee select. We can also, see how there's the square right here? We can click on the cube. We can just click once on this contiguous mesh, because remember, the blade itself is its own contiguous mesh. It's not connected to anything else. So we could just click that as well, and that would be there. Control Z. This isn't the most accurate way when you're dealing with multiple materials on one thing, because if you remember, we were going to have a material here for this, and then a material for the handle itself. So if we wanted to click, by polygon, it's going to override on this edge. And we could take a paintbrush if we wanted to, and really get in there and darken that out, but there's a much easier way to do that. And the easier way to do that is with IDs. And I'll show you that. So let's delete that one. What do we want to make the cross guard? Let's just give it a bronze. So we'll drop that in there. Waiting on that. Okay. So just like in Photoshop, whatever is on top is going to override the other ones. So if we want to move that one up there, we can do that. However, let's go to, so in your layers, there's a little box right here that says base color, height, roughness, metallic. You'll notice nothing over here is changing. All we're doing is we're changing what we're going to edit in here. So what we've been editing this whole time was base color. And this right here is normal. You can see all of your layers, is it layer styles or layer blending modes? So for the base color, these are these layer blending modes. Normal means whatever is underneath it, it doesn't matter. this is going to dictate what is here. But if we wanted to do like linear dodge add, it'll start blending them. We just want normal for this, but what we want to look at is height. Because by default, height is set to linear dodge add on pretty much everything. Oh, except for the smart materials, because whoever made these was smart and set everything to normal, so that's good. But whenever you're doing like materials here, so just go over there, click materials, you can drag a brass pure over here. This is set to linear dodge add by default. So we're going to get all this detail that was, if you see all this height detail? And then we just turn that on, we're going to get that same height detail. But if we go to normal, and because there's no height turned on by default, if we just click that, that'll go away. Well, now's a good time to tell you about that. Whenever you put in a new fill, every single, let's open this up. All of these are fills. Let's drag that back down just a little bit so you can see. So within the bronze armor that I just opened up a minute ago, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 5 things within it. 4 of them are fills, 1 of them is a layer. But a fill will have a color, height, rough, metal, and normal. And you can change all of these here. So if we go back to the brass, where it's much simpler, we're just dealing with 1. So by default, it only had color, rough, and metal. So these will potentially overwrite whatever is underneath it, but if you wanted to overwrite, the height data, you would turn on height, and then you would go over here and you would set this to normal. It was on linear dodge add before. So if you want that to be smooth, you can just do that. But we don't want brass pure right now, so we'll hit delete. And we want the bronze to be just on the crossguard. So again, we'll click this, we'll right click, add black mask. Click on the mask, not the layer or not the folder itself. Right click, add color selection, pick color, grab that, and if we remember, we've matched this down here as well. So both of those will be filled because they're both yellow. And let's make this a leather. So smart materials, you can search leather. I don't know which ones you have by default. I have some custom ones in here, so I'm just going to grab something that looks like it might be a default thing. That's probably in there by default. We don't need this layer one either, so I'm going to delete that. So same deal here. Click there, right click, add black mask, right click on the black mask, add color selection, pick color, red. And I mean really any game you're making for school, this is passable easily. Maybe not for a portfolio piece for sure, but for modeling one and putting it into a game, this is pretty dang good. And that's because we're using smart materials, where the smart materials will read all of our bakes that we've done, and it will create generators, or its generators will generate noise over those. So I'll show you how to break that up. So let's say we don't want all this grossness all the way down. We just want it kind of at the back. So layers, let's figure out which one that is. I believe it's copper worn. We'll open that up. It should be worn surface. Turn it off just to check. Yep. So worn surface, this is the value of that worn surface. So we'll pull this up for a second. And we can click this and we'll make it white or super that color or whatever. So this color data that I showed you just a minute ago hides right there. So we'll Control Z just to bring back what was there. The roughness value, we will go to roughness, and you can slide the roughness around. See how that changes. We'll tap M on the keyboard to go back, and we'll angle it just so you can see the light. Oh, to change the light, hold down Shift, and is it right click? Hold the right click, you can move the sun around. So let's get a nice glare on that. And then when playing with the roughness, you can see how it's super shiny and then super dull. Whatever the default is pretty good. So sometimes, so back over here, where the worn surface is, this mask isn't really displaying. Sometimes you have to just left click on the mask. And is it going to load? No, it's not. Okay, sometimes it just won't happen. See, that's also doing with the copper worn. See right here with the dirt, you can actually see the mask it's generated. This one isn't showing it. But we'll click on the mask editor below. And here's all of the things that are creating the mask that represents dirt. To see, just like in Photoshop, to see what this mask is, you can hold down Alt, left click, and this is what's being generated. So we'll pull up the details, go back to Mask Editor. So remember, we just clicked on the mask itself with Alt click. We want to click back down to Mask Editor. Pull this up so we can see, and from the top down, we can invert. There's a blur amount if you want to blur it. You don't really want to blur it. Global balance will control the strength of it, kind of like a levels. Contrast, obvious contrast. There's texture and texture 2. Those are determined down here with inputs. And these come in Substance Painter. You can grab, there's dozens and dozens you can grab. But this slider by default is just how much the texture you plug in is going to influence it. And then you can open up each one of them. And you can change the scale, you can change its blending mode, contrast, brightness, triplanar, etc. Even that for 2. Ambient occlusion, you can define how much your AO map is going to control how much this mask building is going to take up, or exactly what this mask building is doing. Same thing with curvature, world space normal, which I think is turned off right now because it's at 0, so it's not even bothering to look at the world space. Same thing with position, gradient, and thickness. So with your image inputs, we'll close these real quick. Where'd they go? I didn't want to close all of them, I just wanted to close one at a time. Okay, so here's texture 1 and texture 2. It's using grunge map 014, so it's hit X, and now it's empty. We can go grab a new grunge map if we want. So we'll highlight that, grunge, and there's dozens and dozens to pick from. Let's do grunge rust fine, why not? And now that that's there, we just plugged it in here, and we can play with some parameters here, but really where we want to focus our attention on is up here. So we can change the scale. And if you pump up the scale, you'll notice that it should be repeating. See how like this pattern is the same as here? You've got this here, and then this here is the same. So you don't want to pump the scale up too much. Maybe 2. Can we rotate it in here? I don't think we can rotate it. No, that'd be good. So if you wanted to have a higher scale, rotating it would help break up that repetition, which is a good thing, but it's not on here. Actually, nope. Contrast, brightness, blah, blah, blah. So triplanar. Let's talk about triplanar. We need something better for this. We'll go there, and let's just do something completely dumb, like let's look for a leather pattern. So this obviously, I'm going to tap M. This obviously wouldn't be used for this case, but I'm going to show you how you can do a repeating pattern that you don't want. So we'll tile, and we'll turn off triplanar. Where is that? That's in texture 1 up here. So triplanar is currently on. Let's turn that off. So now we're projecting, with triplanar turned off, we're projecting just down into the UVs. And you know, this might not even be the best case scenario, but right now it's just got this pattern. Let's turn the scale down. So it's projecting this pattern down into the UVs straight down. And it's kind of okay here. You know, actually, this is a really bad example. Let's go to the leather. So we'll pull this back down. We will go back out of Copper War and let's go into the leather. And even just for a better example, let's grab any one of these camos just to show you. You don't have to do this. I'm just showing you what triplanar is and why it's great. So you'll notice right away, remember we cut our UVs here at the top and the bottom? And that created a seam. And now, when you look at it, there's clearly a seam. It's not matching up at all. But some things allow for triplanar projection, which if we go into this, which should be the base color, the actual camo itself, yep. Pull this up. Is there a triplanar option? Yes. Okay, cool. So with triplanar off, it's projecting into the UVs, which looks fine here, but obviously there's the seams. If we turn triplanar on, or rather from UV projection to triplanar projection, it does this. And what's happening is, see this new cube right here? It's actually taking this camo pattern. It's here, here, here. It's on all the faces, and it's projecting it onto the object. So it covers up the seams. There's kind of a little bit of a blur here, and you're going to get that with very low poly objects. You're going to get that on everything, but the lower poly it is, the more obvious it's going to be. But you can kind of play with that in your fill options. See underneath scale, rotate, there's hardness. You can slide this down, and it kind of relaxes that seam it's making now. So if you crank it all the way up, you can see the seam that the projection is creating, but you can blur that seam, and it kind of blends in. So, sorry about the blade thing. That was a really bad example because the seam here is along the blade, and that's perfectly fine. That would make sense if there's a seam there. But here, you can really tell what triplanar projection will do for you. So if you have a pattern like leather straps that are going to go across it or anything else, you want to make sure you turn on triplanar projection. So we don't need this camo. This is just an example. And this grunge, that is now a pattern, we don't need. Open that back up. That was in worn surface, mask editor. And let's do really anything grunge. Maybe even like leaks. If you want to see what's happening to it, you can just scroll to your worn surface. Remember, Alt-click into the mask, and then go back into mask editor so that you can bring back the options. And then maybe put the scale up some. And right now with multiply, it's hit M to go back to see what you're actually doing. It's still going to try to focus on the curvature, but I mean, we could do add, and the whole thing works. And then with this, we might want to change the curvature value. I'm just playing around right now. I'm just trying to show you stuff. So within curvature, you can control how much the curvature map is going to influence things. So you can do with edges. So there's edges, cavities, dual, and unprocessed. Unprocessed looks kind of cool sometimes. It's not realistic in a lot of ways, but sometimes it'll get you exactly what you want. But I'm going to do cavities right now, just to play around with what's going to happen. But instead of linear dodge add, we might want subtract. And that should bring back some of it. Again, worn surface. Nope. What about multiply? And then invert. There we go. Really, just make whatever you feel comfortable with. You can also do something stylized. You don't have to do PBR realistic. You don't have to like grab these realistic materials. All right, good luck on your texturing. This is the most fun part of the process, I feel. I hope you have a lot of fun with it. Get creative. You can do multiple designs if you want. Can't wait to see what you make. So for fun, this is my final. You probably want to export your textures of your final. So let's go to File, Export Textures, and this is our export document window. We want to point to where we're going to put our textures when we finally export, so let's click right here. Select your export location. Need to make a file, or make a new folder. New folder. Double click that, and then just hit select folder. And then next to that, we want to change from PNG to Targa. Then we want to make sure Unreal Engine 4 Packed is selected. If it's not, you can just click it, scroll down, it should be near the bottom, Unreal Engine 4 Packed. dilation infinite, 2048 is just fine, and hit export. Cool. It might say there's some warnings. This warning is typically, if we look down at the bottom, emissive cannot be generated. That's because we didn't make an emissive output, which is, we don't need an emissive here, so that's fine. It's just a warning that says it was looking for an emissive channel, didn't find one. Hey, but we did everything else, which if we go to open folder, everything came out just fine. So from there, you want to take your sword_low, the textures we just kicked out, put them in a zip, and turn them in. All right, good luck.